This video is brought to you by Hagel Music Systems. For over 30 years, Hagel have designed and patented state-of-the-art discrete transistor circuits. The company have used all its knowledge in amplification and applied it to one goal: to reach deep into details and reveal every bit of information to get you closer to music. Visit hagel.com or click on the link below to learn more.
So today we're going to be talking about the NHT speakers, the C3 bookshelf and the C4 floor standards. Now, NHT speakers measure phenomenally well, and some people flat out hate the sound of it, some people swear by it. So we'll talk about the very controversial yet interesting design of the NHT speakers here today. But before we do, let's talk about measurements for a second. Now, a lot of people think that because I do subjective reviews, I don't care for measurements, but that's entirely not true. I do care for measurements, but I do think that measurements don't tell the entire story. So I'm very few that thinks this way. And I hate it when someone measures something in their room with questionable methods and everybody just swears by it. Measurements are done by humans as well, and sometimes there's errors, sometimes it's not done in ideal conditions, and that's why I've decided to send speakers to the NRC. NRC is an anechoic chamber, right? It's a properly done chamber where Floyd Toole used to do his research. So it's proper. So that's the first reason I decided to do it, is because I got the chance to do it properly thanks to Soundstage magazine that I freelanced for and the connections I have there. So special thanks to Doug Schneider, the founder of Soundstage magazine, for allowing this chance. Now, the second reason I care for measurement is because it tells you a good idea of specifications. Okay, just because a manufacturer gives you out measurements doesn't mean that that's, again, done properly. So for example, this speaker here, the C3, is 87 dB in sensitivity. However, when actually measured, it showed that it was lower in sensitivity, hence harder to drive. And that actually corresponds with my subjective assessment here. This is a pretty hungry speaker for power. Now, aside from that, frequency response and so on is pretty flat all across the board for the C4. And I'll link to all the measurements I'm talking about here in the link description below. But again, flat frequency response, very good off-axis response, and so on. So it's a very well-measuring speaker. And that begs the question, how does a well-measuring speaker supposed to sound? And how do they compare to other well-measuring speakers from other brands, for example? So make sure to click that subscribe button and the bell notification so that you don't miss any of it. And let's get straight to it. I think the first thing that my friend said, Tujin, when he first walked into my living space and saw these speakers in my listening room was, "These look bright, these look intimidating." And that's perhaps due to the 1-inch aluminum dome tweeter and the 2-inch mid-range and the 6.5-inch aluminum woofer. So this is all aluminum. The tweeter, mid-range, and woofer, all aluminum. And then on the C4 floor standard here, we have the same configuration, but with extra woofers, 2 extra woofers. So you get 3 woofers here, and you get 1 woofer here. And these are sealed enclosures, so there's no port to be found on this speaker. And it's a very interesting shape. As you can see, it has the sides, much like the Atom Audio, speakers that Tujin reviewed to help with the edge diffraction and so on. For this particular shape. It's a very standard shape. The cabinet is pretty darn solid, and it is an acoustical suspension design like I mentioned. Now, so how do they sound? That's pretty much it in terms of, the overall features as a passive speaker. So, in terms of sound characteristics, this is overall, to me, a thin sounding speaker. And I don't say that in a bad way. Now, to my preference, I like something that's more full sounding, a little bit larger to scale. But the sound that's coming out of these speakers are very sparkly. It has very good detail and nuance. In comparison to some of the Focal speakers, like the Cora series that I reviewed, it is similar, but it doesn't have any emphasis, and it's pretty smooth all across the board. So the details don't come off as sharp when you're listening to music. But with this being said, things are sharper on the edges compared to some of the warmer options out there, for example, like the Bucard Audio S400. And that is especially true for the bookshelf speaker. The bookshelf speaker don't extend down as low as even like the ELAC debut series, which are, more full sounding and colored in a way. So the bass is very, heavy hitting. It is fast, but nothing is exaggerated. It's pretty neutral, like I said, across the board. Neutral bass, neutral mid-range, neutral highs. Now that poses kind of like a boring sound, but no, it's not boring at all. When it comes to, classical music or instrumentals, you really hear that scrape of the bow, the scrape of the guitar strings. You hear all the nuances. So some of you may like that, some of you may not. But especially my friend Tujin, he listened to these, but he didn't find them, particularly bright. He found them on the edge of being bright. And I agree with that assessment. It is on some tracks just a little bit tad too hot on the top end. But on most tracks, it is actually pretty pleasant. When you play something that's of a warmer sounding track, something that was recorded with warmth, you hear warmth. You don't hear exaggerated, warmth or, coolness, but instead you hear exactly that warmth. And you may be mistaken this for a warm sounding speaker. But when it comes to speakers with brightness, it is not emphasized, but you definitely hear that brightness. Now, when it comes to poor recordings, don't get me started with poor recordings. It will tell you that it's a poor recording, and it will tell you with brutal honesty. It will not lie to you. So that's what the C3 speakers are. Now, C4, the floor standard, is very similar, but maybe because it extends actually down lower, it actually has a little bit more oomph to the sound. It has extra body to the sound. So the mid-range is less thin on the C4 than the C3. And I very much prefer the floor standard in this case because the imaging on both are spectacular. The bookshelf is slightly better with imaging, as it should, but overall, it is very comparable. Very pinpoint center imaging. You can pinpoint all the instrumentals on these speakers very well. So I see the beauty in that. Now, in terms of sound staging very similar. You hear exactly as given. I don't think it exaggerates whatsoever. And what is cool about this speaker that I actually didn't experience with a lot of other speakers is that when I was playing something, for example, something that is a little bit more intimate sounding, right, intimately recorded, if that's a word, a term, I was hearing it, and then I switched to a track that has a little bit more space, that's added, that has more space information, and it went from like here to shoo. And now I'm not sure if I'm explaining this right, but the space expanded in which the music took place, and you physically heard that, and that was very interesting. So these speakers don't really exaggerate, space information either. It's not going to be like a 2B, holographic sound. It's not going to be like a Klipsch speaker that kind of has that exaggerated holographic sound. It's gonna give you exactly as its scale. So, a guitar is gonna have a scale of a guitar. A piano is gonna have the weight of a piano. It's not going to exaggerate that whatsoever. So again, all this is to take the point home. It's as given. That's what these speakers are all about. If you're someone about faithful reproduction, that's what these speakers are all about. And you don't have to spend a lot of money out, to get that, in my opinion. The C3 is $1,000 for the pair, and the C4 is $2,000 for the pair, which is very affordable if you want that reference, studio quality sound. In fact, I was kind of joking, but not really joking, to my friend and to Doug as well, that if they were to mix and master with speakers like these, it would give you the ultimate accuracy and every track should sound good. Now, point aside, how does it compare to other speakers that measure well? Well, to give you a little bit of a spoiler, I also sent the KLH Model 5 speakers that I got recently to the NRC. Now, the Model 5 is a speaker I miss a lot because I was listening to them and I had to send it to the NRC to get measured. So that's one downside, is that I miss them. But that speaker measured phenomenally well. Phenomenally. In fact, a lot of people's jaw dropped when it measured so well. Because if you see other reviews, it has that, subjective review of being a little bit colored in the mid-range, right? It's not a reference sound, a flat sound, but more of a fun category where, the bass is, authoritative, has that, white sound stage, more like that clip section rather than, the reference section, right? Well, it measures phenomenally well and, quite surprisingly flat. And the measurements will be posted in my review very shortly of the KLH Model 5. But in comparison with that, this speaker is nothing similar, despite the fact that both speakers measure phenomenally well. Nothing similar. Model 5, I still subjectively think, is a colored speaker in a positive way, in a way that I like. These speakers, it's not my personal preference. I am not for that neutrality, especially when it's not for work, right? For my pure enjoyment, I like a little bit more warmth, body to the sound. But these speakers produce just phenomenal neutral sound that is just, perfect reproduction of what you should be hearing, in the grand sense of being an audiophile, right? Getting that perfect reproduction of whatever was recorded. That's what these speakers are about, and they do a phenomenal job. And again, when it comes to the actual placement of these speakers, they're not all that sensitive because they're a sealed design. Is what some people may think. Not true. I find these speakers to be a little bit sensitive in placement, even though they are a sealed design. For instance, when I had these speakers pulled out of the room a little bit too much, it was too bright for my liking. Didn't have enough bass. But when I pulled them back a little bit towards the back wall, they sounded pretty darn good. And I was like, okay, that sounds a lot more forgiving. In fact, it sounds a lot more full sounding in the bass region. And in fact, I had them at the place of zone of neutrality, which is my room. And I know my room very well because I review, many speakers here. But I found that the place that I taped, that as you saw, that place is where I put my totems. That's where I put most of my speakers on that place first to start out. That's a zone of neutrality in my room. And what I mean by that is when I walk around, that place specifically is where my voice sounds most natural to me, and where speakers sound most natural to me when I play tracks that I know very well. So I taped that place and I had it for a while. And these speakers, what have you, it sounds phenomenal on that space. But when I move it to, away from that, zone of neutrality, it starts to sound either too bright or too hot on the top end. Now, in terms of tone, I did like these with a little bit of tone, not too much, just a smidge. And that gave me really good focus, separation, and all that, like I mentioned. But even having these towed directly out towards the room, it sounded pretty focused, with great imaging, and it sounded phenomenal. The only thing that I personally didn't like is having these speakers towed directly at me, because now everything sounded just a little bit too hot and bright for my ears. However, that may be some of your preferences. That's entirely preference dependent. And I do have to mention that these are phenomenal speakers for low-level listening, but not so much rock level listening. At rock levels, the high frequencies do get a tad bit too bright for my liking. I think low to medium volume is where it's at with these speakers. Now, let's talk about amplifications, because that matters as well with these speakers. So with amplification, maybe because these speakers are so transparent sounding, you hear the changes almost right away. However, I didn't get to pair these up with tube amplifiers because the tube amplifiers I have don't quite have enough power to drive these speakers properly. Now, it's okay with most vocals tracks and smooth sounding tracks, but when it comes to something demanding like a classical music that goes from micro to macro scale of dynamics, it starts to fall off and clip because the amplification can't deliver enough power. Now, surprisingly, the Denafrips Hestia and Hestia and Hyperion, let's try that again, Hestia and Hyperion combination that I reviewed recently matched perfectly with these speakers. They sounded really, really good. Now, the high frequency was just a little bit tad hot with this combination, but overall, it was a very pleasant experience. And those amplifiers don't have that much power. I mean, it is 80 watts into 8 ohms and 150 watts into 4 ohms. I think I mixed this up the other time. I think in my actual review, I switched the numbers and people were like, woo! But anyways, that stack works phenomenally well with these speakers, even though it doesn't have tons of power. Now, I did think that these would like a little bit more power, so I paired these up with something like the Stark Audio. Now, this has tremendous amount of power. Now, no spoilers here. Okay, fine, I'll give you a little bit of a spoiler. It is a bit of a warmer sounding unit, and that's what it was designed to do. It's a Class D amplification. It sounded just absolutely glorious. It had just a little bit of bass emphasis and warmth in the mid-range, added gut, and the high frequency was just a little bit taken off the edge. And that was just a phenomenal pairing and something that I enjoyed. Now, how about something that actually measures very well, right? Amplifier that measures very well with speakers that measures very well. Should be phenomenal. We have the NHT C3, which is the Purify module, and it measures phenomenally well with very low distortion and so on. Now, comparing it, to other amplifications that I just mentioned, again, pretty neutral. Did I enjoy it as much as I did with the Stark Audio combination? Not so much. But it was very neutral and it really spoke to what these speakers are meant to be. Just flat, neutral mid-range, neutral bass, neutral high frequency. It was just neutral at its best. So if you're after that dead neutral sound, that's the combination for you right there. So with these speakers particularly, I think the amplification you use really determines the overall sound you get out of these. Because I think if you pair these up with, big tube power amplifiers, then you will get a pretty tubey sound, in my opinion. Now, I haven't tested that, so I can't say for sure, but these are very transparent to whatever is plugged in. So if you have quality amplification that sounds on the warmer side, then that's what I would recommend with these speakers, and that gives you a very, very nice sound without that bright, edgy sound on the top end. If you like a dead neutral sound, pair up with something that's neutral sounding. Now, two things that I really wanted to try with these but didn't get a chance to is, like I said, big tube amplifier amplification. And second is actually name. Name, I think, would actually pair pretty well with these speakers. It has that kind of drive in the bass that kicks and punches that I think will pair extremely well with these speakers. That's just my assumption. Another pairing that I actually would have loved, but right now I don't have it in hand, is the Hagel amplification. Hagel amplification, I think, would go phenomenal with these because Hagel's overall sound characteristic is just a perfect pairing with these speakers, especially if you like a little bit of edge off the top end. I think this would be perfect with the Hagel. So again, these are all just general suggestions. You have to play around with them. But for the money given for $1,000 and $2,000, I think this is actually a phenomenal value if you're looking for that neutral speaker. And because of its crisp sound characteristic, I think it will be perfect for home theater because it will give you clear dialogue and dynamics with this speaker. It has very good micro detail and macro detail at the same time. So that's pretty much it for this review. Thank you for watching. If this video was helpful to you, consider subscribing and hitting that like button. And I'll see you guys on the next one.